InvestorIdeas.com podcast.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com podcasts. In today's podcast, we're going to be looking at a few public company announcements from CURA Holdings Incorporated, trading on the CSE as CURA and the OTCQX as CURLF. CHRN Life Sciences Corporation, trading on the TSXV Venture as KHRN and the OTCQX as KHRNF. Fire and Flower Holdings Corporation, trading on the TSX as FAF and the OTCQX as FFLWF. Metapharm Labs Corporation, trading on the TSX as Labs and the OTCQX as MEDIF, as well as Citron Global Corporation, trading on the OTCQB as TECR. So first, starting with Curaleaf Holdings, who has announced that it has finally closed its milestone acquisition of GR Companies Incorporated, the largest privately vertically integrated multi-state operator in the U.S. on July 23rd. So with completion of the acquisition of Grassroots, Curaleaf is the world's largest cannabis company by revenue and the most diversified vertically integrated cannabis company in the U.S. And the transaction expands Curaleaf's presence from 18 to 23 states, with the combined company having affiliated operations spanning over 135 dispensary licenses, 88 operational dispensary locations, over 30 processing facilities, and 22 cultivation sites, with 1.6 million square feet of current cultivation capacity. And Curaleaf's expanded geography dispensary presence now offers access to medical or adult use cannabis to more than 192 million people, or roughly two-thirds of the U.S. population. The successful acquisition of Grassroots marks Curaleaf's expansion into new vertically integrated markets in the Midwest, firmly establishing our U.S. market leadership position. This highly complementary combination brings together two companies with a shared vision for enhancing patients' and customers' lives with high-quality cannabis, wellness, and lifestyle products. I'd like to welcome all of our new Grassroots colleagues, patients, and customers to the Curaleaf family as we pursue our mission of improving lives by providing clarity around cannabis and confidence around consumption, commented Joseph Lusardi, the CEO of Curaleaf. The integration of Grassroots is expected to be immediately accretive to our financial performance, with an unprecedented scale providing significant opportunities to leverage Curaleaf's powerful consumer brands as well as the new form factor innovations across our expanded national presence. Now, completion of the transaction strategically accelerates Curaleaf's expansion into Illinois and Pennsylvania, which are among the largest and fastest growing cannabis markets in the U.S. And upon close, Curaleaf will hold a leading licensed cannabis presence in state markets including Arizona, Connecticut, Florida, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Massachusetts, Maine, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, North Dakota, and Vermont. And the cultivation and processing assets in Illinois have been transferred, and the formal approval to transfer certain retail assets is expected imminently. And Maryland operations previously affiliated with Grassroots may be transferred to Curaleaf after expiration of the statutory hold period, subject to regulatory approval and compliance with restrictions on ownership of control of multiple cultivation, processor, and dispensary licenses in the state. So obviously now Curaleaf Holdings finished the acquisition with Grassroots, something that's been building for quite some time, so it shouldn't be a big surprise for anybody. And it does establish them now as sort of the main operator in the U.S. as far as large-scale multi-state operators. The only other real competition will be eventually canopy growth and acreage once they're allowed access to the U.S. market, and that's really depending on the federal legalization. So for now, Curaleaf definitely holds a pretty significant hold over the U.S. markets. And it's taken them a long time to establish that multi-state operation build-out. And really for a lot of there are a few other multi-state operators who are close behind them and definitely have assets in multiple states and have retail, cultivation, and processing. But realistically, yeah, Curaleaf is sort of the main guy for that now. Definitely be interesting to see how things do change if there is federal legalization in the U.S. There's been talks about that in the next couple of years, that there's a real possibility there. Doesn't seem very likely, and I don't know if that would be to Curaleaf's benefit as well, being as they made so much work to build out each of these models sort of state by state. I don't know how much they'd want a federally licensed program that might allow companies like a canopy and acreage conglomerate to come in and sort of build out quite quickly within those states that took them a long time to gain access to. Next, looking at CHRN Life Sciences Corporation, who announced today that it's received its import licenses and all the necessary authorizations from the Directorate General of Drug Supplies and Drugs, or the DIGEMID, for the import and commercialization of full-spectrum high CBD medical cannabis products from CHRN, Colombia into Peru. Successfully completing all licensing, import, and distribution requirements allows us to bring our full-spectrum high CBD medical cannabis products into Peru. We have an experienced country management team in place in Lima, and together with our distribution partner, Pharmacia Universal, we are now positioned to give patients in Peru greater access to the medical cannabis therapies. Additionally, we anticipate fulfilling all necessary requirements to commercialize high THC medical cannabis products in Peru during the fourth quarter of 2020. Comments as Luis Marquez, the KHRN Peru country manager. Now, in Peru, only registered pharmaceutical establishments that have received Good Storage Practices or GSP certification are authorized to participate in the wholesale import and commercialization of cannabis products. Now, KHRN Peru is a GSP certified registered pharmaceutical establishment, and Pharmacia Universal has all the required permits, including GMP certification, to distribute medical cannabis final products to patients through pharmacies under the previously announced agreement with KHRN. Now, with receipt of the final licenses and authorizations from the DIG-MID, KHRN Peru is now fully authorized to import full-spectrum high CBD medical cannabis from KHRN Colombia, which is now fully authorized by the Narcotics National Fund in Colombia for the export into Peru. And the company anticipates prescriptions can be filled commencing in the third quarter of 2020. Entry into Peru medical cannabis market continues our relentless focus on meeting patients' needs in Latin America and globally. We are currently the only company in Colombia that has dispensed medical cannabis to patients and have now surpassed our first 1,000 medical cannabis patient prescriptions milestone. And this, despite a global pandemic that has slowed down many of the world's economies, represents a very important achievement for us, comments Alvaro Torres, KHRN CEO and Director. Again, I've really been talking a lot about KHRN this last year, and it seems to be a really good year for this company. Again, a lot of the long-term plans and payoffs are now starting to bear fruit, and you're starting to see that this company has been planning out its sort of expansion into international as well as the Latin American markets for a long time, and is now actually able to do that. They've done a very smart play. They've been really focusing on making sure that they've crossed all their T's and dotted all their I's with regards to hitting requirements from each of these different governments within Latin America, ensuring that they have also GMP certifications for all of their facilities and all of their products, so that way they can export into Europe and into other markets. And really has just done a really good job ingratiating themselves with the local communities, ingratiating themselves with local governments, and establishing good trade partnerships with all these other pharmaceutical companies or pharmaceutical retailers. So I do think that you're going to continue to hear more and more news like this out of them, just showing that they're either expanding into other Latin American markets. Eventually, they're going to have that high THC cannabis into Peru as well, probably into a few other Latin American markets, as well as into Colombia. I expect their sales to kind of continue to go upwards, even though, again, there is pandemic issues afoot. They do seem to have a pretty well-established distribution plan and sales channels. So I think that they're going to be fine for the rest of the year. And I do anticipate hearing more and more news along them expanding into other Latin American markets, expanding continuously into Colombia, continuing to get their sales, and probably soon, you've already seen some exporting into the EU. Probably going to see a lot more of that. And I do anticipate as well some expansion into the US. They've already done that with their KUITA brand. When it comes to CBD products, I think that that's going to be where they start coming in a little heavier, is probably coming up with some new KUITA branded products, some more along the lines of healthcare and wellness products within the CBD sector. And that could also cross over into other North American markets like Canada and Mexico and other parts of the world. So I really do anticipate that you're going to hear more and more news like this from KHRN over the next coming months for the next year or so. And hopefully this company does actually fulfill the sort of goals that they've set out for themselves, as I do think that it's going to be a huge benefit for Colombia as a whole. Next, looking at Fire and Flower Holdings Corporation, who today announced it's received the approval in principle from the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch of the province of BC for 2 cannabis retail stores located in Vancouver, BC. Now, receiving the AIP is one of the final steps required for licensing cannabis retail stores in the province of BC, and the receipt of the AIP's presents a clear path for the company's entry into this new market. Now, the AIP comes up with the LCRB completing its eligibility and suitability assessment for Fire and Flower, and the company was found to be a fit and proper for the purposes of receiving final licenses upon satisfactory inspection of the finished stores in accordance with the AIPs. Fire and Flower is very pleased to be entering the province of BC in the key urban market of Vancouver. We've been poised to launch stores in the province for some time as part of our national growth strategy, shared Trevor Fencott, the Chief Executive Officer of Fire and Flower. It's encouraging to see that our province of BC move forward with additional cannabis retail licenses. The issuance of additional licenses is a key step in the eradication of the illicit cannabis market, and licensing in the province is an important step in the growth of the legal cannabis industry. So you can check out the opening dates at fireandflower.com/locations. Both of them are going to be on Granville Street, so right in the heart of downtown Vancouver. It is interesting to note that they're finally, at least for Fire and Flower, that they're finally entering into the BC market. They've really been avoiding this for a long time, as a lot of the larger chains have. And one of the big reasons that I've been suspecting has been a lot of the stringent regulations that are affecting BC's cannabis retail market, specifically when it comes to delivery and when it comes to perks programs and rewards programs. Those are two things that are allowed in a lot of the other provinces of Canada and are not allowed in BC. Those are also two very fundamental core assets of the Fire and Flower business program. They've really developed a beautiful online platform. They've developed their Sparks Perk program. They've also been really focused on delivery, curbside pickup, and having a lot of different real accessibility options for their consumers. And I don't think that a lot of that will be allowed in BC at the moment, but there's a lot of momentum pushing the BC government to change those regulations this year. It does seem like it's going to happen sooner rather than later. There's a lot of fuck-ups that have been happening with the BC cannabis retail market that are affecting not only the private retailers, but will be affecting the BC cannabis retail stores as well. And I think it just needs to be addressed and changed. Again, we have delivery access in pretty much every other part of Canada. Most of the US has delivery options. This is really common sense at this point when it comes to how people should be addressing this sort of accessibility of medication or even just a recreational product during a COVID pandemic. You should have accessibility when it comes to curbside pickup, online delivery, and online options. And realistically, as well, for BC, one of the biggest things that the BC LDB has been heavily against is offering any sort of perks and promotional programs, which again, they would not be able to really do. But for the private retailers, that's a huge incentive for them to keep their businesses going. It's also a huge tool for them to use to maintain competition with the BC cannabis retail stores. And as well, it's also the only way they can really compete with price points, as the BC liquor department stores will be selling cheaper than any of the private retailers. So for them to be able to compete, they need to be offering some sort of these programs. And again, I would be surprised if Fire and Flower wasn't somewhat aware of these changes coming down the pipe, as again, that is a big element of their core assets, is the Sparks Perks program, is the online delivery, and is the whole online and sort of very much technical or technology focused side of their business. So them coming into Vancouver, not only a good sign for the company, but is a good sign most likely for what's going to be happening in BC cannabis retail. Most likely there will be a push to change some of these regulations within the next year. Next, looking at Metapharm Labs, who today announced its Australian operation. Metapharm Labs Australia has reached its first month operational milestone with approximately 500,000 Australian dollars for formulated products delivered to customers in Australia, and on its way to developing a strong commercial presence in international markets. Metapharm Labs Australia was conceived as part of our strategy to develop a multi-jurisdictional GMP-certified production capability for worldwide medicinal, wellness, and adult use markets. And since opening at the end of 2019, it signed a number of significant domestic and international customer supply agreements, said Pat McCutcheon, the Chief Executive Officer of Metapharm Labs. To reach this revenue milestone this quickly, in fact, just 2 months after receiving Australian GMP certification, is positive proof of demand for our capabilities and formulations, and that our international team is beginning to hit its stride. And I congratulate my colleagues in Australia for what will be the first of many milestone accomplishments. Now, the company's Australian facility was certified by the Therapeutic Goods Administration as meeting the GMP standard and secured a license to manufacture therapeutic goods in May of 2020. And as the company's Canadian facility was TGA GMP certified in late 2019, Metapharm Labs has created a global pharmaceutical quality supply chain that is qualified to serve new emerging medical markets internationally. Now, speaking on behalf of the local team, we couldn't be more excited by this development and the long-term potential we have to lead on our market, said Warren Everett, the CEO of Asia Pacific Metapharm Labs. Our first month of operations, including shipments of approximately 500,000 Australian dollars comprising formulated CBD and THC oils that our customers can trust on quality and reliability. And these shipments are the product of synergies between our Canadian and Australian facilities, as they were made possible by a new large shipment of finished products in bulk oil from our sister GMP certified facility in Barrie, Ontario. And we intend to continue taking advantage of our internal supply pipeline on a strategic basis as we expand our international market share. Obviously, Metapharm having some great growth in the Australian market. That's one market for the cannabis industry that has really struggled to take off, and lots of companies have been having difficulty within that space. Obviously, it does seem to be changing and evolving like most of these markets. Accessibility is becoming easier, licensing is becoming simpler, and also people now know the strategy and the tactics to employ. Having GMP certification is now a must, not an option. Really, for any of these companies who are planning on expanding internationally, they just have to have that certification for almost all of their facilities. It just seems like that'll be the obvious move. And some companies have obviously had that in mind for a long time. Others are just starting to wake up to that fact. And you're seeing how all these companies are dealing with that. It's also now the ability for Metapharm to have that internal supply chain between Canada and their Australian counterpart. I think makes a big difference for them. And I'm sure there's a few other Canadian LPs who have significant angles like that as well. But it is starting to show, obviously, that the Australian market is going to continue to develop. You're starting to see less instability within that cannabis industry. And hopefully you'll start to see a little bit more growth and easier accessibility for the Australian community, because I know that still, as of yet, it's still a very difficult market to obtain your cannabis and move through. And lastly, today, looking at Citron Global Corporation, who approved for its wholly owned Israeli subsidiary, CTGL, Citron Global Israeli, to take part in a joint venture for the establishment of a Cannavation Center, a cannabis innovation center in Israel to address the needs of the emerging cannabis, CBD, and hemp industry. So the Cannavation Center is a unique all-in-one platform with factories for producing cannabis, hemp, and CBD products, laboratories and logistics and distribution center for supporting the cannabis ecosystem, including cannabis growers, cannabis product developers, researchers, and businesses that operate in a field that requires interdisciplinary professional expertise and compliance with a wide set of regulatory demands, including IMC GMP product standards, 24/7 surveillance and security, and special recycling procedures and more. Now, the Cannavation Center in Israel will provide solutions for the companies in Israel and worldwide, leveraging Israel's leadership in cannabis innovation and promoting the production and distribution of cannabis, hemp, and CBD products for local and global markets. Now, the Cannavation Center is in the process of obtaining a government grant, and the Israeli government provides grants and subsidies specific to the cannabis industry as part of its strategy for boosting the economy through technological innovation. Now, Ora Meyer-Soffer, Citron Global's chairperson and CEO, stated, Israel is leading the source of the technological innovation, including in the cannabis industry. Our Cannavation Center venture is a result of years of involvement in the cannabis industry. We're confident that the Cannavation Center will provide our solution for the needs for the cannabis industry. We are happy that CTGL will be the part of this, and we hope that this will be the first center to be joined by additional centers around the world. Definitely an interesting proposal there. I would be very on board to see a Cannavation Center in Israel get formed. I'd also be on board to see that pop up in other parts of the world as well. I think that Israel is one of the obvious choices to have the first one of these, as far as research, product development, and overall technical aspects of the cannabis industry. That's where the majority of the leaders of the market are coming from. No matter how much we want to boast about North American growers or the plant science in Israel, they've had very legitimate funding and backing for the research and development of cannabis products for a long time. As Israel has not had to really suffer through prohibition as much of North America has for the last 50, 60 years, they really do have a massive upper hand when it comes to science and research for cannabis products. That's where, again, most of the best technical scientists for the industry have been coming from. That's where you're seeing even a lot of the Canadian licensed producers or US-based companies are getting their experts and their science teams from. And also a lot of them are working in partnership with Israeli companies who are in, again, research and development with cannabis sciences. So I would hope that the Cannavation Center does get approved there and that you do see this unfold within the Israeli market and hopefully within other markets, as I do think you do need to have these hubs of experts and expertise all in one space to really understand exactly how multifaceted this industry is. As they sort of mentioned there, this industry does require a lot of interdisciplinary professionals. And I don't think that right now the systems that we have in play really allow for a lot of cross-referencing between different fields. and a lot of people really gaining the overall knowledge that they need to succeed within this industry. So hopefully that does get approved. That'd be a great thing for Citron Global, obviously, as they would own 60% of the Cannabis Center. But realistically, I think that would be a great thing for the industry as a whole. And again, I would hope to see those Cannabis centers open in other parts of the world, specifically North America and Europe, as soon as possible. That's all for today's podcast. Enjoy the rest of your day. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated's CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.